Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on.
Obsessed Woman, submitted by Woozy. When my husband and I first got together, we lived in an apartment that was basically 4 units. The 3 sets of neighbors were nice at first, and, well, their young family was always nice, and the elderly man, I'll call him Ralph, was nice too. But the woman who lived next door, let's call her Sharon, began being obsessed with my then-fiancé. We would grill in the backyard, and my now husband had made arrangements with the landlord to take care of things around the 4 units, as he was in construction. We got a break on the rent because of it. Every once in a while, Jim would get a call to help Ralph with a plumbing issue or something, or the family would have an issue with something else. But once Sharon found out my man could fix things, she started calling him up for the smallest things. Jim is a great guy and always went over to help with a positive attitude no matter how dumb the issue was. And I'm talking dumb, like, I can't get the window open, or how do I stop the toilet from running? Jiggle the handle, you idiot. Let me describe this woman. She was tall and thin and was a chain smoker. She wasn't ugly, but she wasn't a come-hither beauty either. I do remember she had red hair, and Jim would always say that her hair was on fire when something stupid happened and she would call. She took to dressing in really slutty outfits around the place and yard when we were outside, as if she was going to lure him away from me. Yeah, I'm sure, Sharon. One Saturday night we were grilling in the back and just sitting in our yard furniture enjoying the night when we heard her calling from her back window that there was something wrong with her shower or something dumb. So Jim went over. He came out after about 5 minutes shaking his head. I asked him what was up, and he just said that Sharon was getting a little out there. She was not near her bathroom when Jim went in, and he said she was wearing a skimpy nightgown and was laying on the couch in some kind of suggestive way. Jim said he walked right past her to check on her shower upstairs, and she followed him. When he saw there was nothing wrong, she had blocked the door and told him that he needed to pay a toll to leave, and the toll was to give her a hug. He said, "I don't think so," and gently pushed past her and then came back out to me. And so far this is tame. Things got crazier. Not long after that incident, Jim left for work, and she had gotten in the cab of his truck, and he never saw her. He only found out when she started to rub his shoulders from behind, and he almost drove off the road. Like a total pro, Jim stayed calm and simply drove back home and told her she needed to get out of his truck. She did and went inside, and later that day she came out to talk to me and asked me how good Jim was in bed, and I put my foot down and told her that it was none of her business and that I'd appreciate it if she backed off. Sharon went back in her place after telling me I needed to relax. Later, we were going on a vacation, and Ralph was going to watch our place and feed our birds and stuff. I don't know what happened, but he must have left the door unlocked once or twice because we do know Sharon had gotten into our place while we were gone. How do we know? She left little notes in our bedroom talking about how we should all get together and the things she wanted to do to Jim and me in bed. This time we did call the police, but they told us to just try to work it out and that she didn't sound like a serious threat. Yeah, thanks. One of the officers did go over to speak with Sharon, but she put on the charm and nothing really happened. We changed the locks, gave a key to the young guy up front, and didn't rely on Ralph anymore. Sharon still called about things, but it became less frequent, until the final thing before we got her evicted and arrested. Once again, she called for Jim for something dumb, but this time when he went to look at her clothes dryer, she got up behind him with a knife and told him that he was going to please her no matter what. I'm not making this up. She wanted him to get on his knees and have oral sex. According to my hubby, he turned around, saw the knife in her hand, and got on his knees. She opened up her stupid nightgown, and that's when Jim noticed it wasn't a real knife, just a convincing-looking rubber thing. He punched her in the hand and then socked her in the gut and ran out of the basement. She tried chasing him, and then stood at our back door banging on it and screaming that she loved him and that he was supposed to get her pregnant and take her away. I called the police again. Jim called the landlord, and everyone got there in time to see Sharon screaming and ranting in the backyard. The police took her away. Jim told them what had happened and told the landlord he was pissed off that he had never done anything about Sharon and how much of an asshole he thought he was. We packed up some things and left that night and found a new place in a couple of days. The landlord apologized to us and let us out of our lease and then let us stay rent-free for the rest of the month until we could move into our new place. He never took Sharon seriously or our complaints, but then all of a sudden he did. We moved out again not long after that and got out of California. I have no idea what happened to that woman, but she was crazy and obsessed with my man. I still joke when I see someone doing something crazy that they're pulling a Sharon. The Weirdo Gang by G Money Mommy. The year before we were married, my husband and I found this awesome penthouse studio apartment in this old building downtown. It was our first apartment when we were stoked. Not long into living there, strange people started coming out of the woodwork though. We ended up finding out a lot about these people from our landlord when my husband decided to do a documentary about the building. All the apartments except ours and the other penthouse were low income for single adults, and there were some really interesting stories. Anyway, onto the creepiness. Ken lived right below us. He showed up at our door one night with a cooked frozen pizza. He told us he was a chef and had made it for us. We said thanks, and then we threw it out. He came back about an hour later and told us that he heard some Mexicans outside fighting and need to go up onto our roof to look at them. He told us to call the cops or he was going to go out and stab them. There was no one outside fighting. A few nights later, we come home to a DiGiorno pizza still in the box sitting outside of our door. Again, we threw it away. That night, the cops showed up at our house at 4 a.m. in response to a domestic disturbance. We had both been sleeping for about 5 hours. We got questioned by the cops and they left. A few days later, we found this note outside our door. And yes, I saved it, and this is it verbatim. Hey bro, the loud music has got to stop, as well as you're fighting with your wife. I will notify Bob and call the police. You have a problem. Why are you so angry? What are you on? Crystal meth? You have a lot to live for. You are young. You have a film career. Don't blow it, dude. I hope you enjoyed the pizza I left you. Yeah, a little weird. Then there was Ernie, a 120-year-old man, probably only 85, but he wore shopping bags for socks and would always mumble things when he walked by you like typical Mormon tricks cutting down the Christmas trees. Bush is the only one who can get all the channels. Everyone else just comes up short. I know the movies that you like to watch. Again, pretty creepy. And there was Rodney, who always peered out his door at us as we walked by. Some days he knew us, others he thought we were the pizza delivery guy. Those were the ones that creeped me out the most. There were lots of other crazy stories too, and I guess Rodney and Ernie were pretty harmless. But if I see Ken around town, I still get creeped out. Maniac Across the Street, submitted by Tello Funky One. This guy across the street from me was a fucking maniac. I had been working my job and had saved enough money to buy a house in a reasonably priced neighborhood in a suburb of Spokane, Washington. It was a nice place that I was going to fix up and likely sell after a few years. That was the plan, and that's what I did. My next-door neighbors were a young couple that I became friends with, and on the other side was a widow who was also very nice. The guy across the street? Holy shit. Certifiable. Joe, the guy next door, warned me about him right away. He said he mainly stuck to himself, but would have outbursts on people if they did things he didn't like. For example, Joe said one time he was raking leaves and putting them into those paper yard bags, and Frank, the guy across the street, that's what I'll call him, came running out of his house screaming that he couldn't use Home Depot bags because Home Depot didn't support the war effort, and then started kicking the full bags all over the place, spilling the leaves back onto Joe's grass. And then he turned and went home. Another time, Joe's wife had a party with her girlfriends, and one of them parked in the street in front of Frank's house. He came over screaming that no one was allowed to park there, and for whatever bitch parked there had to move her car now. Instead, they called the police, who came out and talked to him. my first experience wouldn't come for a couple of months. I was working on my front porch railing one Sunday morning, and Frank came over and yelled at me for working on a Sunday. I tried to be nice, but he just kept screaming Bible passages at me until I told him he needed to stop yelling, calm down, and get off my property. So then he just went and stood in the street, saying it was a free country, and went back to screaming stuff about the Bible. I paid him no mind and went back to work. A couple of weeks later, I bought my first puppy and was playing with her on my lawn with Joe and his wife. Frank came out onto his sidewalk and yelled to me that if my dog barks at all, he's going to shoot it. I told him to fuck off, and if he so much as touched my dog, I'd break his face for him. He left. Then he started harassing the old lady next door, just yelling rude shit like her husband died early because she was evil and he was a God-fearing man and God didn't want her to be near him. I mean, really vile, crazy crap like that. One night, I was in my backyard talking to her over our fence, and Joe came out through my gate telling me that things were getting crazy. He said Frank had put up a Nazi flag and was sitting on his porch cleaning his guns. He had pointed his finger at Joe while Joe was in his front yard, and Frank yelled bang. He thought we should start documenting everything going forward, and I agreed, and that's exactly what we did. One night, at about 3 a.m, my doorbell rang, and there's Frank at the front door wearing nothing but boxer shorts, boots, and a gun on his hip. He told me to shut my dog up, who was asleep by the way, and if I didn't shut my dog up, he was going to call the police. I said, "Hey asshole, guess what? I'll take care of that for you," and slammed the door in his face. I called the cops, and he told them he was just trying to help me and that he thought my dog was locked out accidentally and was barking to get in. They didn't buy it, and they warned him again. Things progressed. Frank took to putting nails in our driveways and front yards, but we could never catch him in the act, but we knew it was him. He would put his garbage on our side of the street, and he would yell at us every time we came home from work or wherever we were coming back from. Finally, the last straw. Joe was helping me load some timber for my house early one Saturday morning, and out came Frank screaming that we were violating the noise curfew. Joe finally said, "Fuck you," and Frank ran at him and pushed him. Joe tripped and clipped his head on my truck's bumper. And that's when I went into action and swung a huge haymaker and blasted Frank in the side of his fat face, and he fell down in a heap. I immediately called the police while he lay there, and they came out and arrested him after they heard what happened. After that, we didn't see him that much, and I ended up moving a couple of years later, as was my plan. The day I was moving out, he was standing in his picture window holding a shotgun and was just staring at me as I loaded up my U-Haul. Joe was helping me move, and as we pulled out of the driveway, Frank ran out and screamed, "You're lucky you're leaving." Joe moved out not too long after me, but I think that nice lady next door is still there. Frank was a fucking maniac. I've never met anyone like that, and hopefully never will again. Not really who they seem to be. When we were poor grad students, the first place my husband and I lived kept having stuff stolen off the porch, and he couldn't order anything as he'd never get it. So when I joined him, we found another apartment in a different neighborhood, and on Saturday, the neighbors got dressed up and walked to the local synagogue. I thought I'd done a wonderful job of picking a good neighborhood. We had synagogue-going neighbors, and not thieves. At some point, my husband started pointing out char marks. We had put in some wood to replace a window pane so that the dryer vent hole could be cut, and it was charred. There were scorch marks everywhere, and they were elsewhere too. Then there was the day that our mail was singed. I was in a demanding graduate program, so I never really thought about the fact that someone was trying to light fires around our house. Then, one day, it was the dry grass in the backyard. Thankfully, it wasn't a big fire, but we didn't have hoses, and I wasn't having much success putting it out, so we had to call the fire department, and they came out pretty quickly and took care of it. After an investigation, they told us the 10-year-old kid next door, the one whose family always walked to the synagogue every Saturday looking like the poster family for family values, he had been suspected of lighting several fires. They were considering what steps to take to deal with him. This was all happening at the end of our schooling, and we were moving in less than a month, so how all of that ended, I don't know. So, creepy little kid next door who was trying to set us on fire? Let's not meet. My Creepy Neighbors by Chels Ocean 12. Recently, I've encountered some very interesting things happening with the neighbors. First, my neighbors are always watching through their curtains at my boyfriend and I. A couple of months ago, I had some pretty major surgery, and their mentally handicapped daughter, who is actually in her 40s or 50s, whom I've never even met, started coming onto our property at like 5 a.m. and jumping out of the bushes, scaring my boyfriend when he leaves for work. She would ask him if he has a message for her and where he comes from. And then he asked her who she is, and she says, "You don't know?" She would always be barefoot, too. One day, her father watched from the window as this was happening and didn't even try to explain to us what was going on. The father is this grumpy old man, and the wife is a mute who hasn't spoken in like 30 years, and they have 2 mentally handicapped children who are older. I have yet to see or meet the son. So, back to the daughter. She came over the day that my boyfriend brought me home from the hospital and was asking a bunch of questions, so I called the police on her because I was done with her doing this, and the dad wasn't doing anything about it. The police talked to the father and everything seemed sorted out. Well, then the next morning my boyfriend started his truck for work, and the father came out yelling at him about his truck being too loud, and it just got crazy. So fast forward to a month later. I get a text from the landlord saying the neighbors are complaining the dogs are always barking and that we are bothering them. In my head I went, what the fuck? So I just let it sit for a bit, and I knew our dogs weren't the ones always barking. Then I started noticing that no matter what my boyfriend and I were doing, the neighbors were always spying through their curtains, or through a window, but standing back far enough to where we could barely see them, but we could feel them watching. About a week ago, the old man came out and started asking about my ex-husband and why I wasn't at work and so on, but really angry about it. I answered politely and went about scraping the ice off my windshield. He went back inside but watched me through the curtains the whole time until I drove away. This has continued, and every time I go outside, either he or his wife go outside and pretend they're doing something and just watch me and my boyfriend. I saw them putting a camera phone out of the window yesterday when we were packing up our trailer to move. I mean, what the fuck am I supposed to do? I'm already moving out, and I explained to the landlord what's happening. I mean, these people seriously freak me out. The Old House, submitted by CandleDoodle5. I grew up in a rural part of New Brunswick called North Forks. It was just my parents, me, and my brother Andy. When we were growing up, there wasn't a lot to do, and most of our friends lived across the river in Chipman. It was cool living out in the sticks, but we had to entertain ourselves a whole lot outside of Nintendo and the few channels we got on TV. My dad wouldn't pay for cable. We did a lot of hunting and fishing even at an early age, and of course we spent a ton of time in the woods that surrounded our house. Our nearest neighbor was something like a mile or so away, and it was just an old couple that would stop by our house once in a while. When I was in my teens, I frequently went over to check on them, and they spent many holidays with us too. The old man, let's call him Bart for this, plays a role in my story. Between our 2 properties, there was an old abandoned house that I think was used by a timber company long ago where workers all crashed there between shifts. And if I recall correctly, that's what Bart told me. Anyway, my brother and I would pass by it frequently on our travels in the woods, and we always thought it was haunted. It was so bizarre, just down this dirt path in the middle of nowhere, if you get my meaning. Once in a while we would peer into the windows and just see some old furniture and junk, but we never went in to look around. My dad was super against that and told us to stay away from there because we could get hurt as it was such an old place. It was kind of falling apart, so we listened to Dad. When I was about 15 and Andy was 13, we went out to shoot our BB guns with a friend I'll call Chuck. We weren't allowed to go out with our rifles without my dad. Chuck was visiting from out of town and spending the weekend with us, so we were looking for a good time. We walked around the woods for a good while and of course came across the house. Chuck asked if we ever went inside, and I said no, and that it was probably dangerous to be in there. He just laughed and told us to follow him. We got up to it and looked in the windows like we always did, and then walked around to the back of the house. Chuck went up to the door and tried the handle. It turned, and the door opened. "Come on," he said. I stood there with Andy and said, "I don't think this is a good idea." He called us chickens and went inside. I told Andy to stay put and went in after Chuck, clutching my little BB gun. The first thing I noticed was that it smelled terrible. Not that musty old house smell, but like something was dead and rotting. I will never forget that smell. I've come across lots of dead animals in the woods, and it was 10 times worse than that. I saw Chuck heading for the stairs to go up, and I went over to him to tell him we should just get out of there. He didn't listen and went upstairs, and I heard him walking around and stopping every now and again. I looked around the downstairs area, and the smell got worse near a door in the kitchen. Chuck came down and told me there was nothing up there, and he also mentioned the smell. I told him let's go, but instead he went to the door in the kitchen and opened it, and we both looked inside. It was a staircase to the basement, and it was really dark and creepy looking. He said, "Come on," again, and started down. I stood at the top of the steps as he disappeared around a corner at the base of the stairs, and then I heard him shout for me to come down and see something. I wavered a bit, but then started after him. It was a dirt floor basement, and there were no windows to the outside, but my eyes adjusted to the dark, and I could make out Chuck standing across the room looking at something. The smell was even worse down here, and I just wanted to get out. "Hey!" called out Chuck. "Come and look at this!" That's when I noticed Chuck was calling me from another part of the basement. It took me a minute to register what was happening, but the figure I was looking at didn't move. It just stood there. "Chuck! There's someone down here!" I shouted. "What?" he yelled back. The figure sort of shuffled towards us slowly and turned on a flashlight. From the brief piece of light I got before bailing out of there and running up the steps, I could see a dirty older man in tattered clothes. There was a stained mattress on the floor, and next to that a chair with another figure, although it was clear that that one was dead and the cause of this smell. Chuck bumped into me, and we ran up the stairs to hear Andy screaming for us outside. We flew out the door, and Andy was screaming about, "The men! There's men going into the house!" We all just started running and running until we were almost back to our house, looking over our shoulders the whole time. No one was ever following us, thank God. When we did get home, I ran to tell my dad and Bart, who were sitting in our kitchen drinking coffee and talking. I told them what I saw, and Bart's eyes widened. Dad yelled, "I thought I told you to stay out of that goddamn house," and pounded his hand on the table. He stopped yelling and asked me again what I saw. Chuck verified everything, and we just stood there as Dad and Bart looked at one another. "Are you sure that's what you saw?" he asked. "Yes," we both said at the same time. Dad went to the phone and called the authorities, and they asked to meet him out at the house and for me and Chuck to be there too, when he told them about what we saw. The 4 of us drove out through the dirt road and got to the house. There were 2 RCMP guys standing at the door knocking on it. No one answered, so they went around back and went in the same way we did, and they were just going to do a welfare check. They were inside for a while, and finally came out with the guy that we saw in the basement. He was really skinny and disheveled, and looked like he hadn't washed in years. There was something very off with him, though. He just looked strange. It's hard to explain. The 2 other guys were not in the house. So, the reason my dad didn't want us over here was because there was a family that had been squatting here for years, and that they, as Bart said, weren't all there. The other person I saw in the basement was the mother, who had passed away weeks before, and these sons just kept her body in the basement. All 3 brothers lived down there next to her putrefying body. Don't get me wrong, they weren't like mutated hillbillies or anything, but they were more mentally challenged, and it was actually kind of sad. The 2 brothers were eventually found too, and my dad explained that a lot of people had bad run-ins with them in and around town, and that they were kind of dangerous, and another reason to not be around that house. I don't really know what happened to them. but I do know that they tore the house down a few years ago. It's been like 20 years since this happened, but that smell in the place was so putrid it will never leave my mind. We didn't get into trouble for being out there, and my dad now says it's probably a good thing that we stumbled into that situation. It really wasn't safe for them to be living there with a dead body and doing God knows what else. Encounter with a Creepy Man in a Poncho by a Ginger 6060. I've been debating about whether or not to share this, but I finally decided that it's been long enough for me to talk about it. This happened to me and my mom a few months ago, back in October. It happened in a very rural part of New Hampshire, like a side road on a side road type of neighborhood. It was pouring out, as it had been raining for pretty much the whole day. My mom had just gotten back from down the street in my sister's car, and I was on the couch in the living room, when suddenly I heard the doorbell ring. Our front door has a big glass pane in the front, so we can look out from the inside, and someone can look in from the outside. Through this window pane, I saw a man. I didn't get a great look at him, as I didn't have my long-distance glasses on. But the man noticed that I had seen him, and waved as if trying to be friendly. For the rest of this, I'll refer to him as Poncho Man. I got up and thought about opening the door for Poncho Man, but relented. As I couldn't properly see who it was, I didn't want to let a stranger into the house. So instead, I went down the hall to my parents' bedroom, where my mom was getting ready for work. She asked what was up, and I explained to her that a man in a poncho was outside our door and wanted to talk to us. She went as white as a ghost, and immediately stopped getting ready, closed and locked the bedroom door, and started checking the windows to make sure they were locked. I asked her what was going on. My mom explained that as she was driving home, she had seen the Poncho Man. He had been standing motionless on the side of the main street, and as soon as my mom turned down our road, he started to walk, presumably to follow her. She said the encounter was weird, but thought nothing more of it. I mean, why would someone be out in the pouring rain, down a back road in the afternoon? It was like he was waiting for something. I started to panic as well. My mom called my aunt, and the two are like best friends, and she asked her what we should do. My aunt told her to call the police immediately, so we did. We proceeded to pace around the bedroom, frantically looking out the windows to see if we could see Poncho Man. From where the bedroom was angled, it was impossible to look at the front porch and see if he was still there, but we were desperate for anything. After what felt like hours, we finally saw a police car pull up. We carefully unlocked the door and went to let the officer in, and we explained what we saw, and he agreed to do a scan around the neighborhood. As he left, I noticed there was something on the doorknob. I took it off, and it was a political ad for a candidate that was running for office. It's possible Poncho Man was just campaigning for the candidate, but there are a lot of holes in that story. It was pouring out, so why would you go door to door? And why would you go that route in such a rural neighborhood? The houses are so far apart, you'd barely make a dent on foot. The time doesn't make sense either. Sure, my mom and I were home, but it was about 4 in the afternoon. Most people would still be at work, so you'd probably get no response from knocking anyway. Eventually, the officer returned. He had found the guy down the road and had questioned him. Poncho Man was able to ID himself, and he claimed that he was a political campaigner and was just knocking on doors for that reason. When probed further, conveniently enough, Poncho Man couldn't provide any other door signs, as the one he had left on our house was the last one. That makes his campaign story even more absurd. Our house is in the middle of the street. It's not like we were the last by any means, so why wouldn't you bring enough for the whole street? Even the officer pointed this out to us and said that it was unusual behavior. Although the officer was suspicious of him, there wasn't anything he could do about it, as there was no way to prove intent. He told us to be alert and to not hesitate to call if the Poncho Man returned. Fast forward a few weeks, and I started noticing that a police car seemed to be permanently stationed down the road from us, about a 3-minute drive. I got curious and asked my mom about it, and she said that there were multiple break-ins to the houses down the road, and the police were doing sort of a sting operation. The Poncho Man encounter and the break-ins may be unrelated, but considering how Poncho Man acted, I have a sinking feeling that they are connected. Thankfully, for the past few months, we've heard and seen nothing of Poncho Man. We got a new doorbell system with a camera, and the police left the area where they were doing the sting. I hope this whole situation is over and done with, and that I never have to meet Poncho Man. Guy from the Store, submitted by Lynn R. This happened 2 years ago before my mom and I moved. I was in college staying home to save money while I went to school and worked my part-time job, and my mom was recently divorced, so she enjoyed having me around. We did have 4 cats, but I joked that I didn't want her turning into crazy cat lady if she lived on her own. This really after the tumultuous relationship she had just ended with my dad. My dad has nothing to do with this story, and I love my dad very much, but he and my mom were just not a good mix. They did end things on a good note, and 2 years later are better friends than they were when they were married. But the events leading up to their breakup was not the best. Okay, I'll shut up about that. We lived in a decent neighborhood in a residential area of my city. My street was one of the only ones that had off-street parking for each individual home, as city life made everyone park in the street or wherever they could. It was kind of a nicer neighborhood from a time long gone by, while everything else eventually got built up around it. After my classes this day, which I was taking via Zoom due to the pandemic craziness, I would often go down to a supermarket about 2 blocks away to shop for dinner, which I always made for my mom. She busted her ass at work, and I always liked to prepare something for both of us to kind of end the day on a relaxing note. Plus, I love cooking. When this all started, that's exactly what I was doing. I was shopping at the store for the things I needed that night. Just a couple of things I had forgotten on my normal weekly shopping trip. As I was walking through the aisles, I noticed a man in his late 30s looking at me. At first, I couldn't be sure because, really, how can you be sure in situations like that someone really is looking at you, and not just something else in the store? But I confirmed it when he came over to where I was, and I was looking at some produce, and he said, "Excuse me, I don't want you to think I'm weird, but I wanted to tell you that you have really great legs. Have we met somewhere before?" Okay, that's not awkward. I know I'm in really good shape, and I take care of my body, and that wouldn't be weird if the situation hadn't been with a total stranger. But I gave off a meek thank you, and then I just got what I needed and moved away. As I walked around the rest of the store, I only saw him 1 or 2 more times, as I was busy shopping. I just chalked it up to a guy who didn't know how to talk to women and was giving it his best shot. I got all of my items checked out, and made my short walk home, kind of laughing about things and thinking about what I was going to tell my mom when I saw her. When I did get home, I put everything away and cracked out some of my assignments before I was going to get dinner going. I went to get the mail, and when I went out of my front door, for some reason I looked down the street and saw what looked like the same guy I saw in the grocery store. Now he was just standing on the sidewalk about 2 houses down from mine. It really was just a quick glance. But I noticed the red ball cap that he had been wearing and made the connection that it was the same guy. Not trying to be paranoid, I just went back inside and tried not to think of anything of it. I mean, who knows? Maybe he was a neighbor I had never seen before, or perhaps someone visiting someone in my neighborhood. We have a very tight-knit neighborhood, and all of us, for the most part, are on a first-name basis, but the truth is I couldn't say I really knew every single person that lived there. So I went back inside and started making dinner, and it was now around 4:30 in the afternoon, about 45 minutes before my mom would be home from work. The front doorbell rang, and I went to answer it, and of course just looked outside to see who it was before opening the door. There was no one there, so immediately I thought, UPS? FedEx? I opened the door to see if a package had been left, and again glanced up the street when I noticed there was no package on our front porch. What I did see was a figure running away that was wearing a red ball cap. Now I had a new set of questions bouncing around in my head. Was it the same guy? Was it a neighborhood kid that kind of resembled him that was just playing a prank on me? I mean, who hasn't done the whole ding-dong ditch thing in their life, right? I shut the door, got back to dinner, and waited for my mom to come home. When she did, I gave her a few minutes to chill out before dinner and mentioned the things that had happened that afternoon later. She kind of shrugged when I told her and said there were so many coincidences. How could we draw that it's the same guy you saw in the store doing those things and saying those things? We got on with the evening and I had more reading to do for school, so after feeding the cats and playing with a couple of them before bed, I should mention 2 of them are extremely lovable. One is 50-50 and the other is a complete epitome of a nasty house cat. Loves you when he wants to, make sure you know you are serving him, and is markedly not as affectionate as the other cats, but we all got along. But for some reason, Tom was hanging out near me. After trying to pet him for a few seconds, Tom jumped away and went up into the bay window looking out over our front porch. He is certainly a protector as much as he is a jerk, and I heard his low growl as he looked out the window. He has a growl that sounds kind of like he's purring, but there's a menacing aspect to it. You can tell that he's mad. I was switching off the lights in our living room, and when the room was dark, I walked over to where Tom was sitting. I asked him what he was looking at, and he kind of glanced over his shoulder at me and then went back to looking out the front window. I crouched next to him and pulled the curtain a little bit over to the side to see what he might be looking at, and knowing Tom, it was just someone taking their dog for a walk or something like that. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, and the street light right next to my yard and my neighbor's yard was shining brightly, and there was nothing going on. But it was at the edge of the light that I thought I saw someone standing looking at our house. My heart sank that it was the same person with the red ball cap, and that made me go up to my room that also looked out through the trees onto the street. It was wintertime, so there were no leaves on the trees, and when I got there, I looked over to the streetlight where we had just been looking. Sure enough, across the street, just in the shadows, was someone standing, wearing a red ball cap. The man just stood there for another few minutes before turning and walking across the street directly under the light, and that's when I knew it was the same guy. I called to my mom and I said, "Hey, I think that guy is outside again." And she came from her room into mine and looked out just as the figure was walking back up the street, out of range of our sight. Mom said to just make sure all the doors were locked, asked me what my schedule was the next day, and said that she would also be making sure to take better stock of the surroundings because at this point, things were getting weird. Nothing happened that night outside of the normal 2:30 a.m. cat freakout any cat owner experiences. I mean, we love them, but they drive us crazy, right? The next morning, I got up at my normal time to go to the gym, and as I was backing down our driveway from our garage, I was looking on both sides in the dark to see if someone was standing outside our house. Trying to still not be paranoid, I kept thinking I would see someone, but didn't. So I just got my workout in and was on my way home knowing that I had to shower quick to get to my first class. My mom would already be gone by that time. So I got cleaned up, got something to eat, and then logged on for my Zoom meeting. It was a pretty boring lecture, and I got up to make some tea when I looked out my kitchen window into our small backyard and saw that I had forgotten to close the garage. That's when I saw him. Now I knew it was the same guy. Long hair, green military-style jacket, and a red ball cap. He was staring into our garage. I immediately went to the extra remote control for the garage that we keep in our kitchen. I hit the button and then went to the back door. I opened it and yelled out, "Hey, who are you? What are you doing in our backyard?" The guy never even looked in my direction, but immediately bolted down our driveway to the street. That's when I called my mom to tell her about what had happened, and she said to call the police. I called the non-emergency number and let them know that there was someone strange in our neighborhood that I had never seen before, but that I thought I had seen him at the store before and that he had talked to me. Without busting on our city's police, I got the "be sure to keep an eye out if you see him again and call us back" line. Okay, sure, I said, knowing that the only way anyone was going to come out was if something serious happened. Nothing happened for the rest of the day and the next evening, but things were about to escalate. The following day I did my gym routine, and I should mention the gym is about 2 miles from my house. I was talking to a friend as we walked back to our cars. It was just starting to get light out at that point when I stopped in my tracks. I noticed the same guy was standing at the edge of the parking lot of the gym. I told my friend that someone was following me, and we both went back inside right away. I told some of the guys at the gym and also called the police from there. I told them that someone I thought who had been hanging around my house was now hanging around the gym that I was at, and they told me to stay put. This time they did send someone out. The officer asked me for a full description of the person, what he'd been doing, and then asked me to retell the same thing I had told the police the other day. He asked me if he could follow me home, and I said yes, that would be great. He gave me his card and told me to call him if something else happened. He said he was going to make a full report and see if a patrol car could go up and down our neighborhood a couple of times during the day, just to see if anyone was hanging around, or maybe even possibly scare off someone who may have been hiding out. I was nervous about going home and being alone, so I decided I was going to get all my stuff for school and go to the public library rather than be home. I emailed my professors and said I was going to be working on assignments but wasn't going to be in class that day. I don't know why I thought that would be a good idea, but it made me feel better to be around other people. I stayed at the library for most of the day, outside of going to get something to eat around 1, and then I headed home. My cell phone rang, and it was my mom. She was already home for some reason, and was yelling into the phone that she saw the guy standing on our porch when she pulled in. Same jacket, same hair, same ball cap. I told her to call the police immediately and that I was on my way home too. At first she said to stay away, but I was not about to leave my mom home alone with some weirdo stalking around our house. I got home, and shortly after an officer pulled up in front of our house, as did another car. We again told them everything that had been happening, and they said that they were going to put a full description out on their radios for everyone to be on the lookout for anyone matching the description we gave them. I asked them about driving around our neighborhood, as the first officer I talked to said what they would do, and the officer confirmed that they had been doing it, but they hadn't seen anything or anyone out of the ordinary. We were both pretty scared at this point, my mom and I, that is. This was someone who was not going away, and even though I joked about it, was kind of freaked out, as well as whoever this guy was didn't seem to change his clothes. When I pointed that out to the police officer, the other officer said, "Hey, he might be a homeless person who's just confused." I almost laughed out loud at that, as it certainly was the same person I saw in the store, and if he was a homeless person that was confused, he sure had a funny way of showing that after our conversation and his weird compliment. The police left, and I made something to eat for dinner, but my mom and I were both on edge. Thankfully, it was Friday, and my boyfriend was coming over to visit. He lived in a town about an hour away and was planning on staying the weekend. We all just decided to have a couple of drinks and relax, and we were planning on going out to meet some of my friends, but suddenly I didn't feel like that and kind of wanted to just be with him at home. Chris is an awesome guy, and we're now engaged to be married, by the way. He tried to keep the evening light for us, knowing we were a little shaken up. And as the evening wore on and we had a couple of bottles of wine and my mom decided to retire for the evening, we were just kind of doing our thing, making out in the living room and talking about all the things school and future that were in our paths. Around 12:30, Chris looked up and said, "Someone's outside." I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said that he could hear someone was on the porch, but wasn't sure if they were still there. The lights were off in the living room, and he went over to the bay window. He ripped the curtains open, and there, staring into the windows from the other side, was the guy. This was the first time we both got a look at him, and he didn't look anything like he looked in the store to me. Now he looked disheveled and really creepy. His eyes seemed to be bugging out of his head. Chris jumped back and then ran for the front door with me telling him to not open it. He wasn't listening to me as he ran out onto the front porch and tackled the guy. I mean, really tackled him. They both went over the porch railing into the bushes and onto the frozen ground. They were rolling all over the place. I was screaming, and my mom came down. The cats were inside going bananas, and that's when Chris let out a very loud yell. I was standing on the porch yelling if he was okay as he was clutching onto this guy. And thankfully, my mom had called 911. Chris was yelling all kinds of swear words at this guy, and I could see darkness on the snow around our bushes, but not realizing at the time that it was actually blood. I kept screaming, and now lights were coming on in our neighbors' houses, and my next-door neighbor came out with a flashlight and immediately jumped towards Chris and the guy. It seemed like forever, but the cops finally showed up and grabbed both Chris and the guy, and they got them separated. I was trying to hold it together, but kept yelling for Chris, and my neighbor was trying to do his best to hold the other guy to help the police officer. Another police car showed up, and things started to get a little settled down. But the guy was screaming about someone named Scarlett, and that he had to see her. Chris finally piped up and said, I've been stabbed, and the cops attended to him quickly. It was kind of hard to see things in the dark, even though the streetlight was there. Chris had in fact been stabbed twice, once in his thigh and once in his arm. Now another cop car pulled up, and all of these people in the neighborhood were now surrounding our yard, and an ambulance was called for Chris. My mother was on the porch in hysterics, and I was crying my eyes out, trying to make sure Chris was going to be okay. He kept saying he was going to be fine, but the cop said, "You need to get to the hospital right now." They got the man in the red ball cap into a car and tried to start settling the neighborhood down. Another car showed up, and there were tons of questions for me and my mom, and of course Chris. One of the police officers found the knife that the man had stabbed Chris with, and it was a big survival-type knife. Actually, the officer called it a Rambo knife. I was asked to go with Chris to the hospital, and another officer would be following us there. Once we got there, Chris needed a bunch of stitches in his arm for a really big gash, but the stab wound in his right thigh needed staples. The knife was so sharp, it really split his leg open like a ripe melon. Chris was in stable condition, but had lost a lot of blood on our front yard as well as on the way to the hospital. He was going to be fine, so I breathed a sigh of relief about that. The officer who stayed with us asked way more questions for us and told us that the man was indeed homeless and mentally incapacitated. He was convinced I was his ex-wife when he saw me at the store. And then he was telling the police that he needed to talk to me about his divorce. He wasn't strung out on drugs, he just wasn't in his head anymore. A while later, I learned a little bit more about him, and it's a very sad story. His wife had cheated on him with his business partner, and the two of them had stolen all of the money out of the business and run off together. They had taken this guy for everything that he had in his life, and he kind of just went crazy and then went into the streets. This had happened about 8 years before all of this happened to me. We did have to press charges, and he was put into a criminal facility in a hospital. For all I know, he's still there, but he pled guilty to all the charges. I think someone convinced him that this was the best thing for him to do, and I like to think that maybe one part of his sane mind realized who he really was, where he was, and what he'd been up to. Chris healed just fine. My mom decided to move to Florida and sold the house, and I got my own place as I finished up school. Chris and I are planning on moving as well as soon as I finish my degree. So that's my story of basically being stalked by a guy who thought I was someone else. It's too bad he couldn't have talked to me, or maybe I could have talked to him to let him know that I wasn't who he thought I was. Maybe all of this could have been avoided. I'm very thankful to the police officers who showed up and took what I was saying seriously after the first call where I didn't think they cared at all. I am much more diligent about being with people when I go out now. Even though I know I'm safe, every once in a while I will see someone at a store or a bar or a restaurant who's looking at me, and I think, oh boy, is this going to be round 2? It's hard to get out of that mindset. Thanks for sharing my story if you do, and all I can say to everyone is be aware of your surroundings, and don't take things lightly if you have a gut feeling that something is wrong. I don't harbor ill feelings towards the guy who did this stuff, and I just hope that he's getting the help that he needs, and I hope that he can get back into life. I'm not sure if that's possible, but there's always hope. A Block Away from Home by Nia. So this happened on Saturday. I'm a 29-year-old female, and I live in a decent neighborhood. Not the best, but definitely not one usually thought of as super dangerous. It wasn't even that late, like 9:30 in the evening, and it is summer in my country, so it had been dark for an hour or two at most. I had left my friend taking transport back home, and since my friend had left in a rush, there was a thing I wanted to tell her that I felt I would forget once I was home. But I got my phone taken from my hands a few months ago, so I was waiting until I was in a safe place to take it out. I turned a corner, and there's literally 1 block to my house, and this is a pretty small street. I thought I was safe, and suddenly, someone talked to me. His words were slurred, so I didn't quite get what he said, and it was dark. But after a moment, I understood he was telling me to give him my phone, or my wallet, or something. I stared, and despite the darkness, I saw something in his hand, which he was holding very much like a gun. I think it might have been fake, but still, I was terrified. For some reason, I looked around, and not so far away, walking towards me, was another woman. I screamed for help and ran away from the man, all the while bracing myself for the pain in case the gun wasn't fake. The woman yelled at me to stop running and to go get inside one of the buildings closest to us, and we did. There, after having a panic attack, the woman told me the man had been next to a car that I didn't see because I was so fixated on the possible gun. I doubt the man wanted anything other than my phone, but still, the fact he had a quick and easy escape and that there was a possibility that I could have lost more than just my cell phone was terrifying. So to the man, let's never meet again. And to the woman and her friend who walked me that block home, and also the doorwoman that gave me water when I was panicking, I'm sorry I didn't ask your names or properly thank you, but you guys are my heroes. Bad Neighbor, submitted by Blonde Brian. This happened when I was 15 years old and my sister was 13. We grew up in a suburb of Rochester, New York, in a good neighborhood with a good school district and lots of friends everywhere we could walk or ride our bikes to. It was an awesome place to live and still is, even though I'm much older now and live in San Diego. My sister and me both wanted to get summer jobs for spending money outside of our allowance. So Jane and I would ask our neighbors if they had any jobs or chores they would like us to do on a weekly basis for the summer months. Mowing the lawn, watering flowers, whatever. I got a couple of lawn jobs that my sister would help me with, but we thought we hit the jackpot when one of our neighbors, I'll call Stan, asked if we were interested in light cleaning in his house. My mom said no at first, until Stan explained to her that we wouldn't be using household chemicals, just dusting and vacuuming, that sort of thing. I think the most caustic job we had was washing windows once in a while, and my mom was cool with that. I love my mom, but she was very protective. I mean, seriously, we could use all that shit at our house, but have someone else ask us to do it for money? That's crazy talk. Stan was going to pay us $20 a week, so we were going to split that, and I told her that I would give her some of my money for lawn mowing jobs. We were going to be making an extra bunch of bank for the summer. We both got a $10 allowance on top of that, so all this extra money was really great for us. The first time we went to Stan's house, he showed us all the stuff that he wanted us to do every Friday. And he showed us where he kept the vacuum, the dusting stuff, all that kind of thing. We figured it would only take us about an hour and a half to do everything, so it was a deal and a half in our world. Everything was fine, and we started working as soon as school ended in June. The only time we couldn't do anything was one week when my parents always took us on summer vacation, and Stan was fine with that. Stan had been in the neighborhood for as long as I can remember, was married but didn't have kids, just 2 corgi dogs that were a lot of fun to play with. We were doing our thing every week until the last week of July when we were going on vacation. We had a bunch of money stocked up for the trip. We were going to see my cousins in Pennsylvania, and we had a blast. Everything was just a great time. When we got home, our accumulated mail had been dropped off by the mailman, and my dad was going through all the stuff we had received. Most of it junk, I'm sure, just like today. But he came across a handwritten note and then looked at my mom and didn't say anything. When she asked him about it, he said he would talk to her in a few minutes and then asked me and my sister to keep unloading the Navigator. We didn't think anything about it. We were just ready to go see our friends and head over to my friend Randy's pool for a swim. This was on a Sunday, and when we got back, we completely forgot about the look my dad gave my mom when he read the note. That Monday, I was getting ready to go out that morning to do one of the lawns I had to normally do on a weekend, but my dad asked me to stay home for a little bit. I called the neighbor whose lawn I cut, and he just joked with me that if I took any longer, the grass was going to grow over his house. I told him I would be there later that day. At about 10 that morning, a guy came to our house who turned out to be a detective with the police department. He introduced himself, and my father invited him in and told me and my sister to go in the backyard for a minute, but not to go anywhere else. I immediately thought of the note, but being dutiful to my parents, I just did as my father asked and dragged my sister with me. It was then that I realized my mom had stayed home from work, too, so something certainly was up. My dad called for us to come back inside after a bit and told us that the detective had some questions for us and we needed to be truthful with our answers. The detective asked us about what we did at Stan's house, and we told him about our cleaning job that we'd been doing for the past couple of weeks. He nodded and wrote things down and asked about what rooms we went into, what kind of chores we did, all that stuff. Seemed pretty straightforward. And then I asked, "Are we in trouble?" The detective looked at my dad and then looked at us and said, "No, you're not in any kind of trouble." But then he started asking questions about if we noticed anything strange in Stan's house. We both said no. We just did our cleaning thing and sometimes stayed longer to play with the dogs. I should mention that Stan and his wife were not home while we cleaned the house. They had jobs too. The detective thanked us for our time, and then my dad and he went out into our front yard and kept talking. After he drove away and my dad had come back inside, I asked my dad what was up, and he said he would tell me about it in a little while. Then he made a phone call and took a walk up the street to a neighbor's house. I had asked him if I could go and cut my lawn, and he said yeah. We had no idea what was happening, but by the time I was finished cutting my lawn, Randy had called me and asked if I wanted to go swimming. So I got permission from my mom, and that's what I did. When I got home for lunch, my dad and mom were at our kitchen table talking, and they didn't look very happy. The detective had come back to talk to my dad, and he just seemed very angry. I asked him if everything was okay and if we were in trouble. He just took me by the arm and gave me a big hug. My sister came into the room, and he did the same thing to her. My dad was a very gruff guy, and did not show his emotions very much when I was growing up. As he's gotten older, he's much more emotional, especially when it comes to his grandkids. I guess he was saving all of that up for them. And that's okay, because I loved my dad and mom no matter what. My dad asked me to get him a beer out of the fridge, and I did, also asking for the customary sip. He smiled and said, "Go ahead." Everything seemed to be calmed down. But later that day, the detective came back one more time and spoke with my father privately. It wasn't until the next day that my dad sat me and Jane down and said the detective was coming back over. And when he got there, he opened up a manila envelope and showed some pictures to us. They were pictures of me and Jane at Stan's house as we were cleaning. We both looked at each other and answered the detective when he asked us, "Is that you?" And we said, "Yeah, that's us." He didn't say anything else and just nodded. And then he had some more pictures of me without my t-shirt on as I worked. Stan's house didn't have air conditioning, and it did get hot in there, so sometimes I would take my t-shirt off. And my little sister would work in her sports bra. We didn't think anything of it. We were home alone. It's my sister, for crying out loud, and no one else was around, so we didn't think it was weird. What we didn't know is that Stan had asked another neighborhood kid to fill in for us on the Friday that we had been on vacation. That's when the trouble started. It was a kid I knew in the neighborhood named Ben, but wasn't friends with him because he was only 11 or so. Ben had been asked to do what we did, but Stan was home when Ben was there. Stan had apparently asked Ben to work wearing a pair of shorts that Stan asked him to wear, saying that they were special cleaning shorts. They were just like regular bike shorts, but Stan also asked him to take off his t-shirt. Ben did what he was told, but immediately told his mom when he got home after getting his money. Ben's mom then called the police, as she was a single mom and didn't want to confront Stan or Stan's wife on her own when she knew something was very wrong. Stan had also taken pictures of Ben, which the police went over and asked him about. Stan admitted to taking the pictures and was reluctant to show the police the pictures he had taken. But when he did, he wasn't careful with the printouts that he had, and the police noticed other pictures in this scrapbook that he had. This led to more questions for Stan, and eventually, in the next 2 days before we got home, the police raided his house. They found all kinds of child pornography on his computer, including the pictures of me and my sister. Obviously, we weren't in any kind of pornographic picture, but we were still lumped in with all these other kids. Stan had been home the entire time we were doing our job for him, but he had been hiding and taking pictures of us as we worked. Like I said, the other pictures were terrible, according to my parents, and we were never really shown what they were. I can only imagine. Stan was arrested for trafficking kiddie porn and was convicted and is now serving a sentence in prison. He got 16 years for the amount of stuff that he had, and he was also sharing and trading it on the internet in various chat rooms and websites. Whenever he does get out, he's also a registered sex offender, wherever he goes. All I do know is that his wife left him, but I think he is up for release this year. It's creepy as hell for me and my sister to this day to think that our pictures had been stored with some of the most vile garbage that can possibly be created out there. What kills me is that he had actual photographs that he had to have had developed or printed out on his own computer. I mean, those were of us. Why he did that, I have no idea. But in one instance, I feel glad that he did, because it was his downfall, and he got caught for all the other crap that he had. Goes to show you that you never really know who your neighbors are. Stan and his wife always seemed like regular people and joined in neighborhood get-togethers all the time. And who knows what else he was up to, but I'm glad he was arrested and sent to jail. Sick people like that don't ever change, and it sounds like he had a collection that went back many, many years. I don't think about this all the time, but I thought I would send my story into you, and as I finish writing this out, I'm going to check on my kids who are now fast asleep. I'm a trusting person, but when it comes to my kids, I have vowed never to be lax. The thought of them ever ending up in pictures like that on someone's computer or wherever else is terrifying to me. Neighbor from Hell, submitted by Tilo Bombastic. I heard one of your podcasts about a guy who tried to harass a kid next door and poison his dog. I think that's the way it went. So I thought I would share my story. Before I went off to college, my parents moved into a neighborhood that was predominantly white. And this is not about race because I am African American. And everyone in the neighborhood was really cool and actually friendly. We knew a number of people there as well. But this couple across the street were by far the epitome of the neighbors from hell. They were both in their 60s, and everyone on our block hated them. They went out of their way to be the biggest assholes they could be. And it seemed like they went out of their way to harass my mom and dad, too. Anything anyone did in the neighborhood that they didn't like heard about it, including screaming in the evening hours, and they always stayed in their own yard for the most part. Except to park like jackasses in front of other people's driveways. I mean, seriously, they did things like that. They would park one of their cars like halfway across the driveway and say it had to be there because they had someone coming over to work on their house. Mind you, they could have just parked their car in front of their house, but they always blocked our driveway or our neighbors' driveways. And half the time, no workers ever showed up. And one time, I distinctly remember seeing them just sitting on their porch watching their car. One night, I was playing my guitar out in their garage around 9 o'clock. The guy across the street, I'll call him Joe, came to the edge of our driveway and started screaming his head off that I needed to stop playing, and that I wasn't allowed to be doing that. This was the middle of summer, and everyone had their garage doors open and were doing different things, working on their cars or whatever. I wasn't even playing loudly at all. He threatened to call the cops and his lawyer, which, as a snot-nosed 16-year-old, I just started laughing at. He then threatened to go get his gun, and turned around, and that's when I went inside and told my dad what had just happened. My dad ran outside right up to his door and started ringing the doorbell and banging on it. Joe and his wife suddenly were not home. I heard my dad say something like, "If you ever threaten my kid again, you better hope the police get here before I get to you." Probably not the smartest thing to say, but man, my dad was pissed. A few days later, our friends that were a kitty cat corner across the street next to Joe and his wife were out doing some yard work. This was always a mistake when the two neighbors from hell were home. It was always risky doing anything outside because these two nuts would come out and scream at you. I mean, if you were just doing your lawn work, they would come out and scream at you. If you were too loud or too close to their property, they would go insane. Our friend across the street and next door to Joe, I'll call him Dave, was just cutting his grass along the property line, and out comes Joe's wife, of course. I'll call her Betty. Over the lawnmower, we could hear her screaming, even in our house with the windows and doors closed. She was going completely ballistic and yelling that he was out cutting the grass too short and that it would look different than theirs and they had to cut it the same way. Dave shut off the lawnmower as I opened the front door to get a view of what was going on, and she was just screeching and waving her arms. She finally stopped to take a breath, and Dave, as politely as he could, said, "I'm allowed to cut my grass any way that I want, and I'm not on your property. I'm sorry if you don't like that." She screamed out, "Fuck you!" and then stormed into her garage. Dave just stood there, but she came back a second later with a rake in her hand. Not like a plastic leaf rake, but one of those garden rakes, the steel kind. She started jabbing it in Dave's direction, still screaming her head off. I saw Dave's wife get on her phone while all this was happening, but Dave was standing his ground. Dave kept telling her that if she hit him with that rake, he was going to sue her, but she said he couldn't because she was on her property, and the air was public property where she was waving the rake. Yeah, again, these people were fucking cooked. Finally, she went back inside the house, closed the garage door, and a few minutes later a police car showed up. There was a conference with our friendly neighbors, and then they all drove off. My dad went over and talked to Dave for a while. So, yeah, this was like normal stuff. When I say that this happened every day, it probably happened more than once a day. And then things started to get a little more awful, and that's when everyone in the neighborhood decided to start a block club after a little girl got hurt on their front sidewalk. And like all kids, they like to ride their bikes up and down the street, on the sidewalk. And this little girl, she was maybe 7 or 8, was riding up and down when Joe came out to scream at her that she couldn't do that. Of course, she's a little girl. She burst into tears and left her bike and ran home. I didn't see this, but my sister did because she was out in the front yard playing with another friend. They watched as Joe picked up this little girl's bike and threw it into the middle of the street. Of course, the father came down to see what the hell was going on. He saw the bike, picked it up, calmly got onto his phone, and started walking back to his house. You guessed it, the police came back out. This time they went over to talk to Joe, but he denied doing any of it and said that he watched the little girl just throw her bike into the street and run away. Nobody was buying that bullshit story, especially when my sister yelled over that that's not what happened. Joe suddenly lost his composure in front of the cops. He called my little sister a whore and shook his fist at her. The cops immediately put him in handcuffs and walked him to their car. They didn't take him away and they didn't arrest him. I think they were just trying to scare him. Of course, that didn't work, because that night Joe, and I don't know who else would have done this, sprinkled a bunch of broken glass bottles onto the front sidewalk in front of his house. The next morning, pretty early, another little girl was riding her bike up and down the sidewalk and fell onto some of the glass, and it cut her hands up pretty good. And her screaming was just as horrific as Betty's. This time the cops did come back and arrested Joe, who said he had nothing to do with it, but when he was told that his sidewalk was to be maintained by him no matter what happened to it, we were all thankful that Joe was going away for at least a few hours. Too bad for us, after he was hauled away, out came Betty and started blaring a radio that was playing that Lee Greenwood song, Proud to be an American. She would play it over and over and over, just rewinding the cassette tape and then play it again every time that the song stopped. Our noise laws don't go into effect until 10 p.m., so there really wasn't much we could do. But somebody did call the cops anyway, and of course they came back out. She started screaming at them to get off her property, and they told her that she either had to turn the music down or go inside, or she was going to visit her husband. She screamed out her trademark, "Fuck you!" and then went back into the house with her radio. The worst thing that happened was something that I've heard happening in other stories on YouTube or podcasts around the Halloween time. Everybody in the neighborhood always did cool stuff to their houses on holidays, no matter what it was. But this one year, Joe and Betty decided to hang a bunch of nooses from their front tree in the middle of their yard. I mean, no people or dolls in them or anything, just a bunch of nooses. Of course, being African American, my family kind of took offense to that, and we made a complaint, but there was nothing anybody could do about it because it was their property. About a week later, everybody got a piece of paper in their mailbox with a list of people that needed to leave the neighborhood. All kinds of people. Older folks, younger folks, people from all walks of life, creeds, and colors, including my family. It wasn't signed by anyone. There were a lot of misspellings, but we all knew where that came from. That winter, the snowblower war started. Some people in my neighborhood had plow services, but some of us either shoveled or used a snowblower to clear the driveway from snow. Joe took it upon himself to go up and down the sidewalks and blast snow into everyone's yards. And think about the apron that goes to the street, between the sidewalk and your driveway. He would literally go to neighbors' houses and blow all of the snow from the aprons into people's driveways, no matter how deep or wet it was. Made it a giant pain in the ass for everybody to clear their driveway. Of course, this pissed off a lot of people. And again, there was another meeting of the block club to confront Joe on his behavior. I remember it was a cold day and there was snow on the ground, and a group of dads went over in front of his house with a bullhorn and started yelling at him about his behavior, and that no one was going to be putting up with it any longer. He and Betty came out onto the porch and started yelling back that they can do whatever they want, it's a free country. The last straw was when he said to my dad, "This neighborhood was great before you N-word people moved in." My dad is a successful business owner, and he took it in stride. But he grabbed the megaphone and told him that if one more thing happened, we weren't calling the police anymore, and their trouble would ensue. Joe just said, "Get off my property," even though they were all standing on public property, and my dad said the same threat again. Joe yelled back, "If I see that kid of yours outside making any more noise, you're going to have trouble, and I will be calling the cops." My dad said, "If you lay one finger on any person in this neighborhood, I will personally break your arm." Everyone knew that my dad meant it. Well, the cops did show up because Joe and Betty called them, and my dad had to account for the conversation that they'd had. The cops were pretty cool about it and said, "Just don't engage them, try to ignore them, but if any kid or anyone else does get hurt, we need to call them immediately." I should also mention that Joe and Betty didn't even get along. We would hear them screaming at each other all the time. I mean, whether they were in their house, in the yard, or in their garage, they were constantly yelling at each other. Super nice people, huh? It finally ended on its own. Joe was out in his yard that spring and suffered either a stroke or a heart attack. I mean, I don't wish that on anyone. But the crazy part of the story was that we're pretty sure Betty saw it happen and did nothing. She just let him go right there on the front lawn. Thank goodness no kids or other neighbors were around to see that, but I was told that someone driving by did see him after they noticed Joe laying there. They also saw Betty just standing in the front door looking out. Of course, when Dave across the street came outside, he noticed and ran over to try to help Joe, but Joe was already gone. Dave's wife called the police and let them know what happened, and Dave did see Betty standing there and kept motioning her to come out, but Betty kept shaking her head. Then he just started telling her, "You need to call the police," and she kept shaking her head. So that kind of ended it, and after a while I was off to college. Halfway through my freshman year, my mom called just to say hi and then mentioned that Betty had moved out and the house across the street was up for sale. Eventually, a new couple moved in, and they're really nice. I don't know where Joe went after he passed away, but I'm wondering if it spelled out HE double hockey sticks. I really don't care where Betty is. That screeching voice was enough for me to never want to hear from her again. I hope this is appropriate for your channel. Neighborhood Trouble, submitted by Raven262. My brother and sister-in-law and their kids all decided to travel to California to visit my mom. We hadn't seen her due to COVID, so we were excited to go and spend some time with her. I was flying single as the fun uncle, and was looking forward to seeing my brother and his family as well as my mom. She lives in a gated community, and when we flew in, we got through, and my mom showed us how to get through the gate and where the community pool was, and we were just excited to be together for the first time in over a year and a half. My brother has a little girl and a brother who is 3 years older. They're 4 and 7. Really good kids. They're not troublemakers, but they are still kids. So the trouble began when we went to the community pool one afternoon. It's a much older crowd in my mom's neighborhood, and almost everybody there was really great and super nice. All the older ladies doting over my niece, and a lot of the older guys encouraging my nephew in the pool. He'd been swimming for a while, but he was doing some laps trying to avoid the older folks who were just soaking or hanging out. But of course, there's always one asshole in every crowd. This one guy kept yelling at my nephew about his splashing. And mind you, all he was doing was freestyle crawl up and down the pool, just kicking his legs and going slow. He wasn't racing, but this guy just kept yelling about it. I happened to be in the pool while my brother and sister-in-law were hanging out on their chairs and watching over my niece. So I went over to the guy and introduced myself and said, "Hey, I'm his uncle. He's not hurting anybody, but if it's really bothering you that much, we can come back later when you're not here." The guy looked at me dead in the eyes and said, "Why are you even here?" I could tell that something was going on with this guy, whether it was meds or something else, but he just seemed a little off-kilter. He then told me to get my effing nephew out of the pool or he was going to call the HOA. I didn't want to cause trouble, so I called out to my nephew and say, "Hey, little dude, we got to get out of the pool." Of course he was bummed, but I told him that we would come back. The guy just stood in the pool with his arms crossed staring at us. I went over to my mom and said, "Hey, that guy just told us we should leave because the little dude here is swimming too much." My mom just rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, yeah, he's kind of a pain." All right, no big deal. I figured we would just come back another time, and if that guy was there, we would avoid the pool and figure out something else to do. My brother was really pissed, but I calmed him down and said, "Man, look, it's not worth it. This guy is just an old coot. Let it go." The next morning, I went out for a run around the neighborhood. As I was jogging, just listening to my headphones, I heard a beeping from behind me. Mind you, this was like 7 a.m., and no one was out, except for, you guessed it, the same clown from the pool. He was directly behind me, honking his horn and waving his arm out the window. I slowed down and got onto the grass, and he pulled up next to me with his window rolled down and started yelling at me that I shouldn't be on the road running, and I was supposed to be on the sidewalk. Again, trying to be the good guy, I thought, okay, no big deal, and said the same to him. I apologized and said, "I'll run on the sidewalk," even though I knew I didn't have to do that. So he drove away and I continued my run, just listening to my headphones again. Honestly, I think it was one of your podcasts that I was listening to. When I got to the gate of the neighborhood, I turned around and started running back. What do you know? Suddenly I hear beeping again, but now in front of me. It's the same guy. Now he's yelling at me that I shouldn't be running on the sidewalk or grass because people pay for the landscaping and I'm ruining it. At this point, I started to get pretty pissed because this guy was clearly just harassing me. I stood there staring at him until he finally drove away and went out through the gate. Then I just jogged back to my mom's place, told my brother and my mom about that guy again. My mom didn't want to start any trouble, and I don't blame her, because that can be really crazy in a neighborhood with older folks and all the nonsense and trouble that they can cause. But she was angry and said the next time she saw him, she was going to say something, that we were okay to be there. We were just visiting, and he didn't need to be harassing us. That evening, we all went to the pool, and no one was there. So my niece and nephew got to jump into the water and swim around without bothering anyone else that normally would be there. A couple of older folks did come by and just sat in the chairs laughing and enjoying their evening while we were enjoying ours. But of course, here comes the dick. I swear to God, he was following me around for whatever reason. I don't know if he didn't like the way I looked. I don't know if it's because I have long hair or what, but he was not bothering anybody in my family, just me. He started yelling about the kids in the pool, but everyone shouted him down and told him that he needed to just leave and let the kids have fun. He eventually left, but not after pointing his finger at me. That evening, I had to run into town to get some stuff while my brother and sister-in-law got the kids ready for bed. I went to a grocery store to get some things, and as I was checking out, I saw that guy out of the corner of my eye. He had followed me there. I need to tell you, this guy was in his late 60s, early 70s. Not in bad shape, but still not in the shape that I am. but I couldn't figure out what his problem was with me. He didn't even buy anything, but he followed me out into the parking lot over to my car, which was actually my mom's. He proceeded to punch the trunk and tell me that I was not wanted around here. I actually laughed out loud and said, "Dude, what is your effing problem? Seriously, I'm just here to visit my mom. And why the hell are you following me?" Before he could answer, I decided, man, don't escalate this. I got into the car and started driving home. This is when he started to drive up alongside of me, then get in front of me, slow down, follow me down side streets, just doing anything to continue harassing me. We got back to our neighborhood, and I went through the gate and went straight to my mom's house. I got inside and figured, you know what, again, don't get into anything out here with some guy that you don't know. That night, I heard a tapping on my window in the bedroom I was staying in. I pushed up the little louvers and saw this guy standing outside my mom's condo, and he started saying that I needed to go or there was going to be trouble. That was it. I got up. My brother heard me, and I said, I'm going out to get this guy. So we both went outside, and it was around 1:30 in the morning. This guy was still in the yard, but now had a handgun. I can't tell you what kind, but he was pointing it at us and said that we needed to leave in the morning. My brother yelled to my sister-in-law to call the cops. I mean, enough was enough. This guy approached us with the gun pointed right at us, and I said, "Pal, you better put that thing down. You don't want to go to jail." I was still trying to be cool, but also stick up for my family. He kept advancing, and I could tell he was either drunk or high on something because he just started to yell. I was backing up and thankfully opened my mom's garage with the garage door opener on the outside. He brought his gun up, pointed it at me, literally 5 feet away from me. And I grabbed the only thing that I could grab out of the garage, which was a coil of garden hose. The guy started screaming all kinds of stuff about white power, and I'll be totally honest here, I am white. But then he kept going on about how we didn't belong out here, and how we needed to get out. I still have no idea why he had such an issue with us. We didn't do anything. So I ended up swinging the garden hose at him and hit him right in the side of the head. And this is where everything went crazy, because he dropped the gun, but it went off. I wasn't aware that could actually happen with a gun, that it could just fire on its own. Shows you how much I know about firearms. But of course now everybody in the community came out, and he was saying that I took the gun away from him and tried to kill him. I'm sweating bullets, no pun intended. I was saying, no, this guy came over here to harass us. Thankfully, I had kicked the gun into the grass, and because it was too dark, he couldn't find it. And in his unsober mind, he was looking for it, but couldn't find it or pick it up. So then he decided to lunge at me and grab me by the legs and threw me down onto the concrete driveway. That's when I really had had enough. I rolled over and used my jiu-jitsu training. Yeah, I'm really into jiu-jitsu. And I just started to choke him out. All the neighbors were now there watching me do this, and the cops rolled up to see what was going on. They pulled me off the guy, and it took a lot because I was so pissed and just wanted this guy to go to sleep. The guy then took a swing at one of the cops, and that was it. I have never been a proponent of police brutality, but I was also not going to stop them from slamming this guy back onto the ground, dragging him yelling, and then slamming him onto the hood of the car. He kept yelling all the time about this silly stuff, white power, and no one knew what the hell he was talking about. We did find out that he was on some kind of medication that he had taken too much of, and had been taking too much of it over the course of a couple of months. They figured that's why he was off all the time, and why people didn't understand what was wrong with him. He was arrested and taken away, and that's really the last I've heard about any of it. My mom said the people in the HOA were talking about not allowing him to come back, the last I heard. I don't know if they can do that or not, but I'm sure they can make his life a living hell. You're familiar with what HOAs are capable of. They asked if I wanted to press charges, but when I found out that he was on meds, I said no. I don't think he really meant to hurt me or kill me, but they did charge him with second-degree something or other, and again, that's the last I heard about any of it. I've never had a gun pointed at me since, but I can assure you that it is a terrifying moment in life when you know if it's a real gun, if it's an airsoft, or if it's a BB gun. Scarily, this one was real. Thank God I got it away from him before he could have shot me or my brother. For a couple of days, it was full of still speaking with the police to make sure that they understood the entire situation. My niece and nephew didn't need to see any of that, and neither did my mom for that matter. But as I said, I didn't press any charges, but I do think that justice was served, and I didn't have to show up for anything other than the deposition that I did the next day. My mom has not seen him in the neighborhood, which leads me to believe that he's probably in jail somewhere. I mean, what a loser. I'm just glad that it was me and my brother outside, and nobody else in my family. Barbecue Interrupter, submitted by Nolan Ryan is God. Hi, found your channel and thought I'd send in a story about a home invasion on Memorial Day weekend. With all the COVID-19 shit going on, we've been trying to keep things on the down low. Our one neighbor? Not so much. I live outside of Houston, but I'm not going to say where. It's a normal, middle-class suburb, but a lot of people around here think they're real cowboys, and I'm not talking about cattle. A whole lot of shit-talkers for sure. I'm 20, and my university sent us home for online learning. I'm not going to lie, I was mixed about it. I was giving up hanging with my boys and the ladies, but being able to finish up my junior year without the bullshit of sitting in lecture rooms was cool with me. So I was home with my mom and dad, my little sister Jazz, who is 16, and little brother Anthony, who's 19. Like I said, we're doing our best to handle this mask shit. I mean, we do it as my mom is a nurse, and it dispels a lot of the shit we see out there on TV. But I'm not going down that road. My parents, and my dad is a vet, and my mom invited my Gramps and Nana over for a barbecue on Memorial Day. It was just going to be us, our family in the backyard, showing reverence and enjoying our company. My Gramps is a Vietnam vet and has this tradition of reading a poem a war buddy of his wrote before he died in 1988. I'll shoot it over to you, but please keep it to yourself, Uncle Joss, unless you really feel it makes a difference. My parents have a normal house in a normal neighborhood with a backyard. Their house has a garage with 2 doors, front and back. I think the guy who owned it before was into cars or something, and he would move them from the driveway into the back. My whole family is also into vehicles, and I think that's how my dad convinced my mom to buy the place. Anyway, my Gramps and Nana came over a little before 10 a.m., and we were going to have a brunch or whatever, and then have a bigger barbecue in the afternoon. My dad was and is the smoker king, and he takes that stuff seriously, up at like 5 to get things going and checking on the pork shoulder and ribs all day long. My uncle comes from a city about 50 miles away, and he called my dad and asked what we were doing. My dad said he should come over. I mean, we figured it was just him and his son. My aunt died 3 years ago. It wouldn't be a big deal. It's just family. So Uncle Ricky came over and parked in the driveway next to my Gramps' super rad 67 Ambassador convertible, with his just as cool 67 AMX. We were hanging out in the backyard, talking cars, had some music going, again, not too loudly, I assure you. We were playing backyard bocce and having a few drinks, my brother and sister included. We were all having a good time, but respecting space and trying to stay low-key. And then it happened. The dick from the backyard over from ours started yelling out shit. He's an older guy that decidedly does not like Latinos like us. And it wasn't just us, though. He routinely gave everyone in the neighborhood a hard time about everything. Where people parked, how late people were out in their yard, and one time he threw rocks at my dad's bedroom window one night to wake my dad up, screaming at him that our back light was on. This was at 3 a.m. So here he is, trying to yell over our music that wasn't too loud. My dad went over to the fence, it's a wood fence, and think that show Home Improvement. He said, "Hey, Bill, we're keeping it down, and we'll kill the music at 11. And hey, you're welcome to come over and join us if you want. We have extra masks and stuff." He was just trying to be a nice guy. Bill doesn't say another word. He just turns around and goes back into his house. My dad shrugs, tells me to turn the music down a little, and we just got back to talking and enjoying things. About an hour later, my little brother was coming out of the garage and said, "Papa, the police are here." So my dad goes up to the garage door and invites the 2 officers in the back, but they declined because of the virus. One asked about our fireworks, and my dad said, "What fireworks?" They went on to say that a neighbor called and said we were blaring music and shooting off fireworks, which obviously was bullshit. My Uncle Ricky came over at this point, and they all had a talk, and my dad mentioned the guy behind us. The officers took one look around, realized that nothing was going on, said everything was cool, and asked us to make sure we got quieter by 11, but to enjoy the rest of the day and evening. Back to the party and normalcy, right? Nope. It got to be around 9, and we were all laughing, and probably louder than we should have been, but still not that bad. My dad got everything calmed down for a minute, and my grandfather read the poem. After that, Jazz wanted to play Loteria, so we were all interspersing jokes and stories, but having a good time and amusing her by playing the game. That's when a rock hit my leg. Not a big rock, nothing like that, but it was enough for me to look around, and I thought maybe it was my uncle or little brother fooling around. Then another one hit the ground next to our table, and it didn't take long for us to figure out that old Billy Boy was throwing shit over the fence at us. It was now getting a little dark, so we could see that he had a couple of those tiki torches burning in his yard, but he wasn't yelling or anything. I got up and went over to the fence and said, "Hey, please stop throwing stuff over here." Then one came whizzing over and smacked against the fence right off to my right, and I said, "Dude, knock it off or we're calling the cops." Then I saw a shape move in front of one of the torches, and I saw that this guy had a freaking shotgun or rifle in his hand. I backed up and called my dad and uncle over and told them what I saw, and that's when a boom blasted out, and Bill started yelling shit about us being a whole bunch of names I don't want you to read here. All three of us jumped on our phones and called 911, and everyone headed inside our house. The cops took a good long time to get back to our house, and it was 2 different officers this time. My dad and I stood on our back porch having a smoke and told them what had happened. That's when Bill started yelling out about how we were liars. He was standing at the fence. One of the officers went over to him and told him to calm down. And we kept talking with the other officer when the other one came back and said that it wasn't a gun that he had, it was just fireworks. I said that was bullshit, but my dad told me to calm down, and I was pissed. I yelled something at Bill, and the cops told me to cool it, and I just went inside. So nothing happened to that dick. The officers gave us a warning and told everyone to take it inside. We did, but around 11 there was a smash that came from our kitchen, and my dad jumped up from the dining room table and then yelled, "Son of a bitch!" There was a brick on the floor of the kitchen and smashed glass all over the floor. Then we heard a smash from outside, and guess who's out there, drunk as hell, screaming names at us and how we were assholes for calling the police on him. Apparently they'd gone over after they left our house and gave him a couple of tickets. But the smash we heard outside was Bill pounding on the windshield of the AMX. My dad, uncle, and me rushed him, and my mom called the cops again. He was swinging the bat and going crazy, but we held him down and took in a few good shots too, I'm not going to lie. The police showed up way faster this time and arrested Bill. He had a loaded .38 caliber in his pants and was wasted beyond belief. The lone officer this time took our statements and hauled this dumbass away who was still calling us names as they put him in the car. My uncle took it in stride and said that he knew where to get a vintage windshield to replace it, and we all just decided to call it a night. All I can say is we were all pretty scared when he smashed the window in the car, but when we saw that he had a gun, man, things could have really gotten out of hand. It's been a bunch of weeks now, and we hope that he's learned his lesson because we haven't seen that dickhead in his yard. If he ever possibly hears this, hey, Bill, go fuck yourself. Crazy Neighbor by Determined Little Boy. This is less of a creepy one-person encounter and more a whole community creeped out by one man. The neighbor in question is somewhat famous for his lawn, an impossibly thick green landscape that he had tended by a company. I've vaguely been aware of him losing it on the landscapers, screaming at them outside, and enough I knew he had a temper. The first real red flag that he might be legit crazy came last summer. He asked a teenage boy in the neighborhood to check in on the house once a day and make sure all the doors and windows were secured and water their flowers. The day they left, though, he left a crazy list saying the kid had to be there multiple times a day, turning off and on different sets of lights at specific times, and leaving weird chores for him. Also, the kid was not allowed to walk on the lawn and had to remove his dirty shoes before walking on the concrete sidewalk. He was never to enter the house, but was to turn off and on the lights from the doorway by means of a stick with a loop on it. Also, he was not allowed to use the garden hose to water the lawn and had to use instead a teeny-tiny watering can. The letter implied that my neighbor would have the kid under surveillance and would have pictures if he failed to comply. Basically, the kid's parents called him and said they weren't comfortable with the situation anymore, and while they would keep an eye on the house, the deal was off. They argued over the phone. When my neighbor got back from vacation, it was early morning, and he immediately went to their house, woke them up, and tried to pick a fight with them. One of the other neighbors is a retired cop, and he came out to see what was going on and tried to settle the issue. Crazy neighbor said that he would let it rest if he was allowed to bare-ass spank the kid. He flipped out when they told him hell no. Sometime after this, another neighbor was at the grocery store when he was cornered by the crazy neighbor. The crazy neighbor apparently just talked at him in rapid fire for half an hour. Among the other things he said, he started saying how wives shouldn't have friends, and said that his wife's sister was so fat she broke the toilet seat last time she visited. After this, everyone started talking about how you don't see his wife anywhere. Occasionally she will be out watering flowers, but while her husband is seen out, she isn't. Considering that she used to be a social butterfly, this is weird. During the winter, everyone found pamphlets in their mailbox from the landscaper he uses, along with a note saying it was mandatory to now use this landscaper in our area, and failure to comply will result in being sued. We are private, single-family homes with no homeowners association, so this is patently untrue. Also during the winter, someone saw his wife and her arm was in a sling and she had a black eye. When they went to ask her about it, he wouldn't let her speak to her and said that she had slid on the ice. Since then, there have been a few attempts made to talk to her alone, and all have failed. Some people have gone so far as to get their church involved and to call a welfare check by the cops when he was out of the house. But if she was being abused, she was refusing to help. Snow was bad this year, and the crazy neighbor blew a fit about the snowplows piling snow on his property, so he scattered screws on the roadway outside before they came in the morning. Then someone in the neighborhood got a puppy. It's quiet and has a fenced-in backyard. Its owners woke up in the middle of the night to the doorbell ringing, and when they came out, crazy neighbor was standing on the road at the edge of the property. He told them that the first time the dog gets out, they won't have a dog anymore, and pulls out a gun and waves it around before pointing it towards the backyard and says, "Bang." Obviously, they go back inside and call the cops. When confronted, crazy neighbor claims he was out for a walk, thought they were awake and stopped by. He says he didn't get the gun out, but it had been on his belt, and that he didn't mean his statement as a threat. He got some sort of citation from the police. Come springtime, he has taken to sitting outside and writing something every time someone walks or drives by. We don't know what, but I have taken to driving differently home to avoid going by him. Most recently, someone put up a swing set in their backyard, and they came back from work to find tire tracks through the backyard, and the swing set run over and crushed. No one saw anything, but his massive truck happens to have the same kind of tires as the tread marks left behind. The retired cop has taken to compiling statements from everyone and keeping records, because we think this is going to end badly.